City Beautiful movement that was a very strong movement of the latter part of the 19th century. It was sort of a romantic idea of the city and so on.
At that time, there was no zoning, there was no planning, everything was haphazard. It was a little chaotic in the cities, and the City Beautiful movement was the attempt to place some order on that and to beautify it.
After several false starts and heated political battles, the Parks Board of 1893 got to work. The members of that board read like a who's who of Kansas City at the time, including Simon Armour and Adrian Stanfront, appointed by Mayor Benjamin Holmes. But the driving force was the board's president, August Meyer, working with City Beautiful supporter William Rockhill Nelson, who put the full force of his newspaper behind the parks concept. Meyer secured the services of landscape architect George Kessler. Born in Germany, Kessler studied in New York before a job opportunity first brought him to the area in the 1880s.
The railroad company hired George Kessler to come to Cumberland, Kansas to develop a park, and the park was named Marion Park. And the park was so popular that they ended up naming the town Marion, Kansas. Well, Kessler was hired as the secretary to the Parks Board at a salary of $200, and as the engineer to the Parks Board at no salary, and was not the landscape architect. He was more interested in being able to do the design and to work the landscaping because he saw the opportunities involved in such a major project than making money from it.
Kessler was the father of our Parks and Boulevard system, and his major work in Kansas City occurred from 1892 to, say, 1905. It was a very difficult topographical area to be involved with. There were a lot of hills and lots of valleys. It's a combination vision, mainly of Kessler and Meyer. That together they both worked very well. Kessler was very much an engineer. Meyer was kind of a Renaissance man that had studied landscape and architecture and was very much able to participate in the discussions and help formulate where it went. The 1893 park system plan was intended to help clear out blight and tie areas together. George Kessler and Meyer understood that the crux of making sure the system got completed to the extent it did was that they had to acquire the property and acquire it fast and then to develop it later on.
The 1893 plan officially created several parks and boulevards, most notably the Paseo. Among the parks were West Terrace Park, a striking replacement for the slums that clung to the bluffs above the West Bottoms. And on the other side of downtown, the equally elegant North Terrace Park.
North Terrace Park is a combination of features. There's Cliff Drive. It was the place that you went out in your carriages, and it was a pleasure drive. There's a spring there that was one of the first fountains in the system. The Shelf Fountain was put there to provide drinking water. It was one of the first places that had gas lights. Another big feature of North Terrace Park is the colonnade area and the concourse, which was a valley that had been filled in. Kessler saw that as a great spot to provide a lookout. And the colonnade was one of the few fancier structures. After it was finished, it was considered a work of art and was actually the main showcase of the whole system. It was featured in all the articles as being a marvel of engineering and architectural design and feature. The Paseo was developed after Meyer had been to Mexico and came back and talked to Kessler, and they decided to name the former boulevard the Paseo after the Spanish influence. It's a divided road with 4 or 5 different parks. Each one of the parks was different. One may have a fountain, one did not. One may have like a little wading pool. Another one would be a formal garden.
Kessler also devised a master plan for Swope Park, at the time the second largest urban park in the country. Located far from most residents, many doubted its 1,400 acres would serve much use for the city.
In the beginning of the park system, Colonel Thomas Swope was opposed to the Parks and Boulevard and was not interested in it. There was a feeling that there may have been an ulterior motive on Colonel Swalp's process of donating the land because he had a condition that the Parks Department had to spend $5,000 a year to maintain it. There's a feeling that he thought that may have taken up all their money and they wouldn't be able to do some of their other work. And they fooled him because they not only spent the $5,000 but more than that and were able to do the rest of the project also. First opened up the park and had a big ceremony. About 18,000 people came out on the trolleys and in carriages, and it's been an active park throughout the years.
The parks began to become places that people could get to breathe some fresh air and see some grass and some trees and get out a little bit. That whole issue demanded transportation, and the boulevards connected, in our scheme, the boulevards connected these jewel-like parks that have stayed in our system forever because of protections in our charter against selling off parkland. But what we are left with, what we see today, are the Benton Boulevards and the Linwood Boulevards and Armour and North Parkway, where the beautiful houses that were built along there were meant to make a statement.
As the boulevards and streetcar lines continue to ring out further and further from downtown, one man envisioned an oasis of urban beauty, even beyond the range of Kessler's system. In the early 1900s, just south of the city limits, near the swampy lands drained by Brush Creek, J.C. Nichols had just begun building a few homes.
He grew up in Olathe. He graduated first in his high school class and went to KU, and then got the scholarship to Harvard, went to Harvard, studied law and real estate. He had the good fortune to do a lot of traveling. So he spent a long time on a bicycle in England and Europe. And he was a good observer. He looked carefully at how things were being built and how they added value over long periods of time. And he was always comparing that with what he had learned here in the United States. And he was stunned by the fact that in the United States, a new development, after about a generation, would tend to lose quality and value. He noticed that some of the places he liked the most had contact with nature and with art and with fountains. And he sort of tucked that away in his memory bank. And the first neighborhood he started, which was south of the plaza, was too close to a brick factory and too close to other problems and too far from the streetcar line, and everyone said this will never work. But he saw it the way it would be when it was finished. And it worked, and the houses sold rather rapidly. And so he started thinking about enlarging the area and building buffers around this neighborhood to make it more beautiful. And so he started creating an infrastructure, not just sewers and landscape and parks and fountains, but an infrastructure that included neighborhood associations, that included a management strategy that would continue to engage the owners themselves in improving their property values. And that was absolutely unique in this country and internationally at that time.
J.C. Nichols saw the advantage of buying land outside of the city to develop, which was to the south. And in developing that, it became incorporated in the city, which was to his advantage, because then he didn't have to worry about the utilities. So instead of moving to the east, where everyone thought that Independence and Kansas City would be essentially a east-west, we became a north-south.
After doing this for about 10 years, came the idea for the Country Club Plaza. And he perceived that people would not be satisfied traveling on streetcars to do their shopping. And he thought if he could build a development that would accommodate the automobile in an elegant way, that would be convenient, beautiful, luxurious, that people would like that. And so he decided he had to do the whole thing. And he developed a company that would do the planning, do the architecture, would do the construction, would market it, would manage it, and so he could retain control. He was trying to develop something that no one believed in but him, and so he went to what he thought was a very attractive out-of-town consultant to add credibility, I think. He hired Edward Buehler Delk to develop a master plan for the plaza. And he designed for and accommodated and in fact celebrated the automobile in the way he designed the plaza and the shops and the parking.
What they did was they interspersed the parking here and there throughout the whole district. They rimmed the parking with shops, so you're not aware of parking lots.
The parking lots, when they were all surface parking, were slightly below the grade of the sidewalk. And there were always walls or berms or landscape or fountains between the pedestrian and the parking lot. And there were no big signs or billboards or any of that because JC thought your eye should be focused on the merchandise and on the front doors and on the fountains, and you had this overall feeling of ambiance.
Nichols' travels in Europe and Mexico inspired the statuary and fountains he personally chose for the district. At one point, he sought guidance from the man whose work had reshaped Kansas City at the turn of the century, George Kessler.
And he, of course, and Kessler became great buddies because Nichols was so taken by parks, art, boulevards, and all the amenities he'd seen in Europe. Kessler helped Nichols develop Ward Parkway South, and they would pick the places because of landscape and terrain that would be the most important as a visual anchor for the neighborhood. And what you often find in that place are things like the Verona columns or the Meyer Circle in Ward Parkway and Meyer Boulevard.
Chief among the architects in the Nichols organization was Edward Tanner, who added much of the Spanish flavor to the area's homes and businesses.
Ed Tanner and JC put in the first things they thought were most important to adding value to the housing. At some point in time, maybe when the plaza was half developed, they decided that there wasn't enough housing at the single-family, low-density scale, so they lined the plaza with high-density apartments and condominiums. This was always intended to be a phased development. And so the two of them, I think, really made a series of decisions that basically, as you look at the plaza today, it's hard to recognize Delk's plan.
Delk also worked on several other important buildings in the area, Starlight Theater in Swope Park, and the Community Christian Church, which borders the plaza on the east at 46th and Main. The church was originally designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. When that notable architect left the project over financial concerns, Delk was brought in to complete most of Wright's original plan.